So without further ado, welcome everyone to the Fall 2020 Honors Senior Thesis Symposium. We're doing this the second time virtually, which is not ideal, but at least in the spring, it was a really wonderful opportunity to hear about what our students are doing. I know this group of students has a particularly fascinating group of projects, and I'm so grateful to them and their mentors and to everyone who's here today. We're going to start with ArrianEbrahimi, who has worked on a project. You can read the title here, Jury Duty is Postponed, but Restaurants Are Open, who worked with his advisor, David Thomason, on this project. In just a second, I'm going to turn things over. And after the presentation, there will be time for Q&A, and there will also be time for Dr. Thomason to say a few things about working on this project. But without further ado, Aryan, it is all yours. Take it away.
Already awesome. Well, Dr. Volka, really appreciate all of your support, and especially Dr. Thomason. Thank you for your mentorship throughout every step of this process. And just as a note about the virtual format of this event, what I do generally like to say is because it's virtual, more people get to come. So very happy and I'm grateful for all of you being here. So the reason I selected this topic of why jury duty is postponed but restaurants are open is for the past 3-4 years, I've been really passionate and active in advocating for judicial independence. It's something very close to my heart. And one thing people often say to me when I tell them that this is an issue I care about is, so what? Judicial independence sounds like this kind of lofty, technocratic, proceduralist thing that, what impact does it have on my life? So I decided to study something on a very relevant issue to us now, as you'll soon see, just to kind of show why judicial independence is a significant thing. So just going straight into it, as we all know, in February and March 2020, the novel coronavirus, which causes COVID-19, rapidly spread across the US. And because the disease doesn't cause visible symptoms very often in its contagious hosts, a phenomenon known as asymptomatic spread arose. Fearing a rapid spread of the disease by hosts unaware of their contagiousness, public health officials quickly recommended unprecedented measures to limit interactions. Where social distancing and mask wearing wouldn't sufficiently lower the risk of that asymptomatic spread, public health officials quickly recommended shutdowns of non-essential activities. And not least critical of such activities was the jury trial. Because virtually every state and federal jurisdiction requires that jury proceedings be conducted in person, countless criminal and civil cases were postponed until further notice. Originally, local county court systems ordered their own jury postponements, which kind of created a patchwork of jury trial postponements, but state Supreme Courts quickly took control, with 46 out of the 50 state high courts ordering statewide jury trial postponements. At the same time, governors in all 50 states announced states of emergencies, and 44 governors pronounced stay-at-home declarations, like shelter in place, safer at home, things like that. Each state kind of has their own way of advertising it to make it sound nicer. Then, because the federal government never imposed a mandatory nationwide shutdown, any kind of nationwide standards, the implementation of public health recommendations differed from state to state. And this patchwork of state level approaches may have been dangerous from a public health standpoint, but it provides fertile ground for statistical analysis. You guys may be familiar with this, and this is kind of a sad slide, but since the first wave of coronavirus infections in the US, public opinion about shutdowns has been really starkly polarized. In early April 2020, 81% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents said that they were concerned governments would lift restrictions too quickly, while only 51% of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents said the same. By early May, this gap had widened to 87% of Democrats and 47% of Republicans, being worried that governments would raise restrictions too fast. And this just shows an ever-widening polarization toward COVID. For this examination, by comparing the external political factors surrounding stay-at-home orders and jury trial postponements, this paper seeks to answer whether decisions by courts and governors to shut down activities and involved gatherings correlated with non-public health factors. Now, going in, yeah, that's the question. Going into this, I had 3 expected results. The first would be that the length of gubernatorial, meaning governors, stay-at-home orders would correlate with state partisan leanings. Governors in more Democratic states would keep indoor dining banned longer, and governors in more Republican states would keep indoor dining banned for shorter periods. Second, the lengths of jury trial postponements I didn't think would correlate with state partisan leanings, but I did think they might correlate with state methods of selecting Supreme Court justices. I'll go in more detail about all of these points in a little bit. I thought the states that employ partisan elections would have shorter jury trial postponements than states employing nonpartisan elections. And I thought states employing nonpartisan elections would have shorter jury trial postponements than states that appoint justices. Lastly, I thought that the average and median lengths of jury trial postponements would be longer than the average and median lengths of indoor dining bans. Now, how did I go about doing all this? It was a pretty straightforward statistical paper. I analyzed the correlations between 4 variables. The length of shutdowns declared by state governors, named Gov, the length of statewide jury trial postponements by state Supreme Courts, named Court, the partisan leanings of states, the variable was named Party, and the state methods of selecting Supreme Court justices, named Select. Because there are only 50 states, this paper employs total population sampling, which means that the relevant closure decisions by every governor and every state Supreme Court were collected by me and compared to the partisan leanings and judicial selection methods of every state. Because this analysis examines the entire population of interest, we can draw much deeper insights into the actions of state officials than a partial sampling could. So the first 2 variables, Gov and Court, they represent the total time that governors and Supreme Courts banned indoor dining and jury trials respectively in their initial announcements. Both are continuous variables, which means that their measurement period begins at the dates at which the orders went into effect, and they end at either the period specified in the initial order or when the activity is ultimately reopened for the first time, whichever is longer. For example, consider that an order is issued on March 10th, and it's initially set to expire by July 31st. If this order does in fact expire on July 31st and the activity, indoor dining or jury trials, resumes on August 1st, then the end date for measurement purposes is July 31st. However, if the governor or Supreme Court ends this order before the July 31st expiration, ends this order before then to August 20th, then the activity will resume on August, and the activity resumes on August 21st. The end date will be when the activity actually ended, so August 20th. Lastly, because this paper is being presented today, if the governor or Supreme Court order was extended to November 14th, I'll just consider the end date for measurement purposes to be today, because I can't wait past today to determine whether the activity does resume later or not, if the end date changes. Additionally, the content of governor's stay-at-home orders differs among states, but each state included indoor dining in its stay-at-home order. I'm using these as a proxy for the end of stay-at-home orders. These orders all had their actual expiration dates, but we want to see when a comparable activity with a comparable level of human exposure to jury trials was reopened. The content of state Supreme Court declarations also differs, but 46 out of 50 high courts all ordered the postponement of jury trials, making these an ideal subject. Oh, did my screen just change? I apologize. It wants me to update my Java. Sorry about that. Hold on. Can you guys see my screen?
We see it.
Yes,
Black
I can
screen.
see it.
Sorry, everyone. I can't see it. Here, I'm just gonna stop the share for a second. There we go. All right, I got it back. Sorry, y'all. I think we were here. All right, cool. I'm going to slide through the variable section a little bit more quickly. Party is just the partisan leaning of the states, where more negative scores would mean there are more registered Republicans, more positive scores will have more registered Democrats. Got this from an online polling site called Gallup. And select, the last variable, is the way a state selects Supreme Court justices. There are 3 ways that a state can elect a Supreme Court judge. There are partisan elections where judges run in political primaries the same way other elected officials would in Democratic and Republican primaries. Texas is an example of a partisan election state. There are states with nonpartisan election methods, so like California, that would be where the judges run, but in nonpartisan elections. And then there are states like, say, Massachusetts that appoint judges the same way that we do federally. Anyway, spend a little time on these variables. Sorry about that. These are going to be the subject of our statistical analysis. So we ran a few different types of correlations. One was between the first 2 correlations, party gov and party court, just show how political party impacted in the gov case, how long stay-at-home orders were issued, so for how long indoor dining was closed. And party court shows how long jury trials were postponed to see if it correlates with a state's political party. Lastly, select court tries to examine whether the state's method of selecting judges would correlate with the length of jury trial postponements. And on the right, you can see the statistical values for how to measure if there was a significant relationship and how strong it was. So on the first one, party gov, we found that there was a significant, moderately strong, and positive relationship between states being more democratic and having longer stay-at-home orders. What this means is in the more liberal states, the orders by governors to shut down indoor dining were longer. What makes this a significant relationship is that the p-value in this area here is less than 0.05, which means this correlation would predict 100% of cases. And it was a fairly strong relationship of 67%, as you can see from the Pearson's correlation variable. Party court was the opposite. You can kind of see from the graph right there that as the state becomes more democratic, there was no statistically significant correlation between the length of its jury trial postponement and the state's political party. That's also to be expected, and that's in line with one of my hypotheses. Lastly, you might remember that I had said that there would be some relationship between the way a state selects judges and the length of the jury trial postponements. There was a significant relationship here. It turns out that having states that elect judges in partisan elections actually had longer jury trial postponements than states that appoint judges. This was a weak correlation, I need to emphasize, but there was something there. So I was really excited to see that that part of my hypothesis actually carried through. And lastly, I'll just quickly mention that the average and median lengths of jury trial postponements were longer than the average and median lengths of indoor dining bans. So overall, judges closed down jury trials longer than governors shut down indoor dining. Now, these are just the findings kind of summarized. Here's where I get to the core of the paper, the more important part, in my opinion. Finding that courts adhere more closely to public health recommendations than governors is itself an important finding, but it shows an even greater distinction between the first and third branches of American government. In Federalist 78, Alexander Hamilton, I'm not going to read this entire thing, but he basically wrote that judicial independence is requisite to protecting constitutional rights. And in the Fourth Amendment, in Article 4 of the Constitution, we write that the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government, which means a government with 3 branches, including an independent judicial branch. While Hamilton valued judicial independence for the purpose of decision-making in cases, this paper found that judicial independence also shields judges from popular opinion in judicial administration. Decisions to postpone jury trials are ultimately administrative decisions, not legal decisions. But this was fascinating. In the highly polarized climate of 2020, like, a lot of Americans have resigned themselves to the belief that judges are just politicians in robes. But these findings suggest to the contrary, that judicial independence is alive and well. Judges are generally less subject to political influence than governors, and the data showed that their closure decisions did not significantly correlate with state partisan leanings. The data also suggests a weak but significant correlation to shorter closures, which may face less harsh opposition, as you enter states that have more political methods of selecting judges. So judges, especially those that are selected more indirectly, make significantly different decisions than governors who are under this same public health circumstances. Now, I don't mean to suggest that independence in judicial administration is necessarily good or bad. When governors consider the political repercussions of stay-at-home orders, they're just weighing the increased risk of death against the economic devastation caused by shutdowns. If you consider it more important to place greater weight on the non-health repercussions of shutdowns, then perhaps independence is harmful for balanced administrative decision-making in the judiciary. Certainly, the criminal and civil plaintiffs awaiting trial will be significantly, perhaps irreparably, harmed by the delay. But the independence this paper found in judicial administration during the coronavirus pandemic reaffirms that American judges generally enjoy great independence. To that end, judges are certainly not mere politicians in robes, because their decisions do not correlate with state partisan leanings. I'm gonna, for the sake of time, skip the further research section. There are some fascinating areas that I think this paper could also go, but I think I'll just leave it there to leave time for questions and get any comments from Dr. Thomason. Sorry about the, hold on, how do I stop share? There we go. Sorry about the little interruption in the middle, but I hope that it didn't take us too far off track.
Good job.
Dr. Thomason.
Good job, and overall, good job on the entire research project. I know this is a subject that I think a lot of the public is interested on the broader scale of how government and government response to something like a public health emergency looks. And I think we focus a lot of attention on how governors have responded, but the questions that you raise are how the judiciary responds. So I think the first, the kind of general question I'd like to ask you about is this subject of judicial independence. And when you think about judicial independence, one of the variables you have is whether or not judges on the state level are appointed, whether they're elected, or if there's some hybrid version of those. Can you talk to the issue of how those kinds of models of determining judicial positions weighs into this broader question of when judiciaries are closed or opened, or the length of that? Did that play a factor in this?
Right, yeah. So the select variable, as I mentioned, and then as you're referring to, basically divided states into 3 different categories: states that appoint their judges, states that elect judges in nonpartisan elections, and states that elect judges in partisan elections. And the basic thing that we found was a weak but significant relationship where in states that appoint judges, these judges were comfortable, you could say, keeping jury trials closed for a longer period of time than the judges that were immediately going to face re-election. You know, in a sense, that makes them more like politicians.
Right, which is kind of the question. So when you think about, this is a theoretical question that I know you've thought a lot about on the broader scale of when we nominate and appoint justices to the federal court system, there are lifetime appointments. The lifetime appointment of a Supreme Court justice, we've now seen just in the last few weeks, a Supreme Court justice is appointed to the court. Do you see the appointment, do you see these kinds of separations, as you suggested with the with the Hamilton Federalist comments, the independence of the judiciary in policy distinctions and political wrangling over current issues? Do you see that as a strength or a weakness in the Supreme Court?
Well, if you look at the US Supreme Court, what you'll find is that generally it's super political in the appointment period, but then for the most part, the justices on the Supreme Court, they have their own ideologies in terms of how they interpret law, but they interpret law rather even-handedly. And that's true across the board with all but, I would say, one of the justices, and I won't name that one justice. And you generally see that in the states as well, where in states that elect judges, they're a lot more immediately subject to that same political rancor that you see in the appointment process federally, because they have to face it consistently when they run for re-election. In the US Supreme Court and in states that just appoint judges to lifetime terms or long single terms, these judges never have to face that political process again. So they don't need to subject themselves to, they don't need to change their opinions for what they think is popular. And here you see a very significant impact of that, where those decisions happen to be whether to open in-person activities or not, and it has actual life impact.
I'll hold a couple more questions till the end. I'll let some other people ask if they have questions.
First of all, thank you so much for a really incredible presentation. I know most of us are muted, but if you could just join me in the chat or aloud in congratulating Arian on a job well done. I'd really love that. But really, great job.
Outstanding.
Really outstanding job. Really fascinating. This is, as you may know, the time where Dr. Thomason would usually give you your honors stole aware at graduation, and you're looking around, which I hope means yes, isn't it? It was in the mail. Now I'm glad it's made its way to you. So Dr. Thomason can perhaps pretend to put it on you, but congratulations on reaching this milestone and really on giving a fabulous presentation on a fascinating project. I wanted to ask one in the current news cycle, and then seeing how judges rule on decisions about the election, if you felt that you've chosen perhaps an even more timely topic. I know it's something that has been really interesting to you for a long time, but I guess I'm wondering, are you seeing an increased interest in the general public just over the last month in judicial selection?
Right. Yeah, certainly. I mean, for those of you who may have attended the judicial selection forum that I put on with the UT Strauss Institute about a month ago, that was, I think, 1 week after Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. So people were definitely thinking about the issue of judicial independence then and now. And what I generally dislike to reassure people about is our institutions matter. And it's important to defend institutions. Many of our institutions are flawed and require change, but my parents came from Iran after the 1979 revolution. And so when I hear the word revolution, I tend to think about institutions being uprooted from the ground and you never know what is left in its place. And nowadays, on both sides, we see a lot of people who are mad at how institutions are treating people, and I agree with a lot of that. But we need to keep in mind that these institutions, like the Supreme Court, if we take hasty measures like, say, adding seats to it, or as the Republicans just did, appointing, breaking precedent, breaking promises by appointing someone right before a re-election, that undermines the institution itself and can have consequences we don't expect. Currently, the US Supreme Court has been a pretty neutral arbiter. You've seen the election cases most recently. They've generally been in defense of voting rights. So I would say a certain lowering of the political temperature is needed. I'll leave it there.
I heard something there I haven't heard from Arian before. I heard a little Edmund Burke there.
For the political theory folks
Yeah.
out there, you know what that means.
Well, I will just say one more thing, and I'll you know, Arian's interest in politics and economics and the judiciary, I think, are things that are apparent in the work that he's done here at St. Ed's. But I see a lot in the future for him, and so I'm looking forward to what's next for you.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Professor.
We have time for one other question if there's anyone who'd like to ask, and otherwise I'd just like to second what Dr. Thomason said. We're incredibly proud of what you've done and to have you as part of the honors program.
Thank you. If there aren't any questions, I could just make one kind of closing statement just about the topic of the paper. I do really hope that with my goal with this was to show a really substantive impact of what does judicial independence mean and how does it impact people's lives in ways that you may not expect. We, throughout our lives on the state level and federally, will see rulings that may make us upset, may not be the results we want to see. But if our courts are subjected to political pressure, when you're on the opposite end of that political stick, you're not going to like it. And if in any situation, not just courts, where you think there's a technical answer to the question, you ought to have some appreciation for independence. We're seeing that now with COVID, where we may not like the stay-at-home orders and the public health measures being passed, but if you think there's a technocratic answer, which in this context there is to some extent, we may want to consider giving power to folks who have some independence from the day-to-day political winds.
Again, thank you so much. Really fascinating. I think a really, really important message that comes out of very technical research for today. So thank you so much and congratulations. We have 2 minutes between now and the next presentation. So of course, love for many of you to stick around for Bailey Galicia's presentation. We also have Lauren Wilson presenting in room 2. And so I'll just say, yeah, thank you so much again and congratulations.
Thank you. I'm going to stick around for Bailey.
Yeah, of course.
Alrighty.
Congratulations, Arian.
Congratulations, Arian.
Oh, is this your family?
Yes.
Yeah, I got a couple
I'm
of
the
them.
grandma.
Family?
Yes.
All
And
right.
also a big thank you to all your